Hi, everybody. My name is Kyler Flock. I'm the Community Engagement Manager here at the Matthews Opera House. And I just want to thank everyone for tuning in for our first edition of the Matthews Reads Earthsea. So what this is for the next 2 or 3 months between myself and Megan Detlefs, we will be doing sort of a podcast version of chapter breakdowns of our book, A Wizard of Earthsea. This is especially for a lot of you folks at home who are limited to going out of your house during the pandemic. This is a way for you to kind of listen in on a book talk. And for those of you kind of reading along at home, we'll be doing kind of 4-ish chapters each month. And then kind of breaking down some of the themes and storylines and plots between us. So, Megan, thanks for joining me here today.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah.
And
do you want to?
Go ahead.
Oh, do you want to give us a little kind of rundown on chapters 1 through 4 from this book? Kind of give us an idea of what was going on.
Sure. Well, first, for anyone who my face isn't out there often as much as Kyler's is, and so if you don't know who I am the marketing manager here at the Matthews Opera House. My name is Megan Detlefs, and Kyler and I are really excited to do this because, as some of you may know, but probably not all of you, we were both English majors in college. So books is kind of something that we really enjoy reading and discussing. So we're pretty pumped to have the opportunity to put our English degree to use here.
Yeah.
So we hope you enjoy it. Okay, so real fast for everyone listening, I'm going to break down chapters 1 through 4. If you have not read past that yet, don't worry. We're going to do our best to avoid any spoilers past that. So if you haven't read chapters 1 through 4, this is going to spoil it for you. But if you haven't, but if you have read it and you haven't gone any farther, don't worry. That's totally fine. Okay, so Dooney is born on Gaunt Island and lives in Tin Alders and works with his dad, who is a blacksmith. His mother died when he was really young. He hates working, would much rather go exploring. One day, Dooney sees his aunt call goats to her using magic. Dooney says the same words, and it works. He calls the goats come to him. When his aunt sees how much power he has, she goes ahead and decides to teach him all she knows. But she does work to keep that dark magic away from Dooney. Later on, their town is attacked by Karg raiders. Dooney uses magic to cast a fog spell over the town and saves his village. However, this also causes him to go into a coma-like state because his magic is spent. A powerful magician named Ogion the Silent heals Dooney, and on his 13th birthday gives him his true name, Ged. Ogion begins training with Ged, but Ged quickly grows beard with Ogion's teaching style. Ogion tries to teach Ged about the concept that magic can upset the natural order of the world if used improperly. In an attempt to impress a girl, however, Ged searches Ogion's spellbooks and inadvertently summons a strange shadow, which has to be banished by Ogion. Sensing Ged's eagerness to act and impatience with the slow teaching methods, Ogion sends him to the renowned school for wizards on the island of Roke. At the school, Ged's skills inspire admiration among his teachers and his peers. He is befriended by an older student named Vetch, but generally remains aloof from his fellows. Another student, Jasper, is very condescending towards Ged and provokes the latter's proud nature. After Jasper needles Ged during a feast, Ged challenges him to a duel. Ged casts a powerful spell intended to raise the spirit of a legendary dead woman, but the spell goes awry and instead releases a shadow creature which attacks him and scars his face. The Archmage Nemerl drives the shadow away, but he dies in the process. Ged then spends many months healing after resuming his studies. The new Archmage, Genscher, describes the shadow as an ancient evil that wishes to possess Ged and warns him that the creature has no name. Vetch eventually earns his staff and gives Ged the gift of his true name, telling him what his true name is. And after turning 18, Ged also leaves school. So that was a very fast and furious summary. Kyler, did I miss any of the big bullet points that happened in these first 4 chapters?
Not really. That's pretty much kind of all the bullet points I had. So thanks for kind of filling everybody in on what we've been reading. So after hearing that, what were some of your initial takeaways from at least the first 4 chapters? I know you and I've read further, but if you can remember, what were the first things that stuck out for you?
Well, the very first thing that really struck me when reading this for the first time was how involved the narrator is in this book.
Mm,
It's a it's a third person limited narrator, but at the same time, this narrator is very opinionated, and I kind of almost want to call the narrator Ursula, because I feel
I
like
know.
it's very much her voice in this.
Yeah.
But right from the get-go, it talks about at the very beginning about how Sparrowhawk, which is a nickname for Ged, is going to become a very powerful wizard. And so right from the get-go, it's like we kind of know the ending to this
Mm,
series,
mm-hmm.
which I find very interesting. And then throughout the whole of, the first 4 chapters, I feel like the narrator is constantly making sure we know, the reader knows, like, what is moral and what isn't, and is
Yeah.
constantly critiquing Ged's, the things that he does. And even there was this one, I think I might have to look it up. So like I said before, the narrator is third person limited. So they're really only talking about the thoughts and feelings of Ged. However, when they do these critiques of kind of the morality of other characters, of the things that Ged's doing or other characters are doing, it's almost like they still make assumptions about what motivates the other character, which gives it this feeling that sometimes the narrator is omniscient about other characters' motives. One example that I have is in chapter 4, when Ged and Jasper are really starting to come to kind of the crutch of their rivalry. In the book, it says, both Ged and Jasper stood silent, for it was true they knew the law of Roke, and they also knew that Vetch was moved by love and themselves by hate. And so again,
Mm,
kind of this idea that I'm just going to assume it's a she because of Ursula, that she's making this assumption of the motives of not just Ged, but of Jasper and of Vetch. And I just find that really interesting. I find the narrator in this kind of an unusual narrator as
mm-hmm.
compared to some other novels, because I feel like it's just not as straightforward. And again, very, very moralistic narrator. I didn't know if that was something that stood out to you.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because initially, no, it wasn't. But you're right. Literally, the first paragraph of the book sort of lays out Ged's whole legacy that's soon to come. And it's kind of crazy. Yeah, you literally get his whole life story essentially in the first paragraph, which is kind of weird. So just knowing that style. But yeah, I kind of also read the author as Ursula, and which is kind of fun because when you read more about what kind of person she was, then it really heightens that thesis or theory even more, that she has a lot to do with it. But I do like it because she gives you plenty of subtle hints. And for all our people listening to this, it's good to point out some of those weird, because there are times where she gives some weird phrases in these early chapters, but if you keep reading, a lot of those little clues she follows through later in the book. So yeah, her writing style is really unique in that way, where she's almost giving you the whole plot throughout the book until you actually reach that point, and you're like, oh, she mentioned this, or the narrator mentioned this earlier.
She's
So
a real
there are
queen
a
of
lot of those.
foreshadowing.
Yeah, big time, big time. Even later in the book, which we aren't there yet, but yeah, I can think of other examples later on in the book where she even sets up for her future novels in the series, because this is the first of, I think, six or seven. It's on the back of the books. But yeah, she puts a lot of hints about the sequels later on, which is, yeah, really cool. So no, that wasn't something that I initially picked up my first time reading it. My first time reading it, chapter 1, and this is me personally, as well as a few other book clubs I've talked to, that they were intrigued by chapter 1 purely off of the setting that she described, the mist and this. I think the opening island is Gaunt, right? Or is that where the school is? Yeah, no, it's Gaunt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just like the green and the scenery and the water and the mist. Like, you can tell that Ursula was very influenced by her surroundings, and I think her growing up in the Pacific Northwest has a lot to do with that. But yeah, I was taken away by her ability to describe foreign worlds, and kind of right off the bat you get a gist of Earthsea with the map, and then the chapter 1, and yeah, that was for me that's initial takeaway.
And I think, one of the things that I appreciate, but this also falls in line very much with, and this is something I know we're going to talk about a lot as we dive into A Wizard of Earthsea throughout the whole NEA Big Read, but the hero's journey is just really established in this book right from the get-go. I mean, she makes it very clear that Ged is incredibly powerful, incredibly naturally gifted. And I feel like that's very much a natural thing within heroes' journeys that we see as a theme, where you have this young, very gifted, whether it be someone who's gifted in wizardry or someone who's really smart, and someone sees that potential in them, but yet they're also very reckless. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of the hero's journey is them figuring out how to use their power or use their talent in a way that benefits others, but also balance out that kind of recklessness. And Ged is very reckless in especially the first 4 chapters.
Yeah, he's kind of frustrating, honestly. You're like, what are you doing? Like, I know for me, chapter 2, the scene with for starters, like, like, I love that Ogion is like this stoic, wise mentor who takes Ged under his wing, and Ged, just like everyone else, kind of expects Ogion to be this like supreme wizard who can stop rain and can teleport and travel speeds, but no, in fact, he's just this boring guy who just is patient and walks slow and never talks and stares at things. And I just love that, like, not only was Ursula ahead of her times on the way she described wizards, but even her characters don't understand her wizards are different than wizards. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? Like,
no,
her whole idea.
Ogion immediately, he said something in the first chapter. So when it's obvious that Ged is this powerful, like he has the potential to be this powerful wizard, and he has just been pulled out of the coma by Ogion, and Ogion's talking to, I think it's Ged's father, but he remarks that that he needs to train Ged because to keep dark the mind of a mageborn is a very dangerous thing. This idea that power without knowledge is just incredibly dangerous. And so because the fact that he is powerful, that knowledge, that gaining that wisdom is incredibly important. And the first thing that came to my mind was Spider-Man and Uncle Ben telling Peter Parker, great quote. Power comes great responsibility. Yeah. And I just think that that's in every hero story ever, that tends to be this underlying thing.
Right. And it's like one of my favorite parts of the hero's journey is like the, with great responsibility, all of that. But yeah, like that's what I like about Ogion is he fits that archetype oh so well. But to your previous point, it was Ogion who highlighted Ged's immaturities for me, because you kind of have them both. Yes. In chapter 2. You get a lot of time where it's the two of them, and it's a stark difference from the boy who wants to learn every spell under the book day one versus the stoic wise master. But yeah, I mean, I love all these archetypal figures, like, and the Spider-Man reference, because that's what makes this book so cool, is these themes are so universal. And she was writing these in the 60s, and we could probably credit a lot of modern day heroes and this hero's journey to some of the to the structure that Le Guin uses. And yeah, I believe he even gave a note for Ged to the school as well. Like, I think Ogion even when Ged arrives at the school, there's a letter that basically says he's the chosen one, have fun, and then drops him off and leaves. But what'd you think? But
only if he's trained well. I think he kind of put that caveat in there where he's only going to be good if he actually learns something.
Which the school gets a good idea of. I mean, he is like a star student, but clearly has some ego issues in our chapters that we're reading. What'd you think of the school? The wizard school.
I really loved. I think that's when the story really started to pick up for me. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed the first 2 chapters, but because so much of it is setting the stage of where it is, getting through, and I'm betting that there are probably some of our readers listening who can probably empathize with this, figuring out and getting through the names and the places and this world. It takes a lot of brain power just to wrap yourself around all of that. And I think Ursula does an amazing job of it. I really do. But you almost feel kind of exhausted in those first two chapters, just trying to figure out everything. And then after you've gotten that, suddenly now you're pushed into this school at Roke and your setting has completely changed. And so you kind of have to do it all over again. It is fast and furious, and it takes very active reading to keep up with this novel. And so once you got to Roke, though, I loved the fact that his high-strungness, Ged's high-strungness, his confidence, his recklessness really comes to a head through Jasper's character. I think that rivalry really opens that up even more for Ged, because, and it's ironic because, and I think I wrote this down, so hopefully I can just kind of talk about the note, just read the note instead of having to find it in my book. But he even tells Jasper at some point that, wizards from Gaunt don't do this for praise, but that's exactly what he's doing it for.
Yeah.
And he just doesn't realize. I think he just has a total lack of self-awareness at this point, which again, very much part of the hero's journey. But yeah, I just think that's and it takes going through everything that he goes through at the school to gain some of that understanding.
Right. But I like that you brought up the first part about all the names and the islands and the characters, because this is my third time reading it, and I'm now finally comfortable and familiar with the islands, the characters. So anyone reading out there, if that's if the names are intimidating, because it's all fantasy, it gets better. Like you said, the first two chapters, they're dense. They're going to throw a lot of terms at you that aren't real. But like you said, once you get to the school, I think this book really starts to open up. But I will bring up one thing, and I'm not disappointed or upset. I was just, when I originally was sitting down to select our book for the big read, I knew that in this stack there was this book about a wizard who goes to a wizard school, and it was kind of this pre-Harry Potter, Hogwarts-esque idea. So when I started this book, I was under the impression that the entire book was going to take place at this wizard school. Not the case. It's really only this one chapter, and that's not spoiling anything for anyone listening, but were you surprised at that? I thought that was going to be like this whole book's plot essentially is this young boy at school. But for the beginning of chapter 4, I was like, he's already almost done. And so they kind of highlight or fast through that part. It was fun to read about the idea of a wizard school because it was probably the first of its kind. But I was a little like, give me more of this Roke island.
I think there's a part of me that, and I think that I would have enjoyed staying there longer. But Ursula is I think she's very conscious about what she chooses to spend her time on, because it's like you'll have these passages where she's going into great detail about how the weather is as they're walking through a portion of the forest or something, and then she'll skip over 2 years with a couple sentences. And so I think that I think it's all part of Ursula trying to say, like, yes, this is a big part of his journey, but she sets it up from the beginning that the whole premise is for us to see, what is Ged's journey from being this reckless, young, inexperienced, powerful person to being this renowned, wizard, mage, sorcerer that he becomes. And so I did have to let go of the fact that I think just because of the fact that I love Harry Potter, I think this idea of being at a wizarding school was very interesting to me. But I also, that's obviously not the most important part of the journey of Ged's journey to Ursula. There's a whole lot more that comes after it. So I do understand why she didn't spend that much time. And so I think that as we progress further, we'll understand more and more as the reader as to why maybe there was only a couple of, like, I think it's the equivalency of like a chapter and a half.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty much, yeah, a little into 3 and then all of chapter 4, and then he's, graduated. But I will say to that, I have never, I grew up as a kid. Fantasy was a pretty influential genre to me and read a lot of fantasy. And of all the fantasy books I've ever read, there really isn't one described quite like this. And I'm particularly talking about the magic that they use and this kind of this whole concept of what like magic is in this world. And it's all just old language. Everything is about the real name of things. And I just think that element is so, my first time reading it, it was really hard to grasp. But now that I've somewhat grasped it, I think it's one of the coolest parts about Ursula's entire world she created. Not so much the characters, the dragons, and any of that. It's this fact that these spells and stuff, and everything's practical. Like there's one part I wrote down that just was so cool. Like when he's at school and he's with one of the 9 teachers, he's learning how to make rain. But this person tells him, if you make rain in this pot, that means there's another spot in this world there's going to be a drought. So everything's this give take relationship, and
it's the equilibrium of magic.
Yeah, and I think that's all a credit to just Ursula's just creativity and brilliance, because you never think of that when you watch Harry Potter or any other fantasy. I don't want to keep saying Harry Potter, beat that to the ground, but any of the fantasy novels you read about or watch on TV or movies, they never break it down in that sort of real world sense, where this kind of feels like there's a real world structure to it, that it really is old language. And if you know an object or person's like true name, you can do whatever. And that was brilliant for me.
And that kind of, this is allowing me to kind of circle back to then make another point that I really did enjoy about reading, a theme that I really enjoyed about this book. So that kind of goes back to Ojian, talking about how it's dangerous not to train Ged with as powerful as he is. And I mean, we see kind of that danger from the very beginning, where he uses the words to call the goats. He doesn't understand exactly what he's doing. He just knows that he can do this, and he speaks the words, and they come to him, but he's immediately filled with fear because he doesn't know now what to do. And throughout these first few chapters, Ged is constantly kind of making these comments about how he's so excited to be this all-powerful sorcerer, because then he won't have to be afraid anymore, and he can just do whatever he wants. And that's his understanding. It's kind of like you and I feel like that's probably would be our understanding of magic. And part of him learning, and part of us as readers learning, is him having to go through the mistakes that he makes, and hearing constantly there are real world consequences to you doing things. When the very first time, I think, because Ojian touches on that after he tries to summon from the dead, but the first time that it really sinks into me, and I think one of the really well-written portions of the novel, is when Ged is asking in school how to transform a rock into a diamond, and how to actually change it into a diamond, not just have an illusion that it's changed into a diamond. And basically the teacher says, you need to have the wisdom to know that it's not smart to do that. Like, yes, you could change it, but you're impacting the world in a way that it shouldn't be impacted. And being a truly powerful wizard is knowing the consequences that your action is going to have, and then choosing not to use that power.
Yeah, I love that everything, because it's really easy to do in fantasy and in fiction, is to kind of, a character's got a magic power or an ability, and then they do it, and that's kind of that. But Ursula this book just does it, and there'll be plenty more references later on in the book of where they kind of break a spell down or an ability and say, well, it comes with consequences. And I just really like that, because that seems like I don't know, a really fresh take, especially even for the 60s. And even now, if there was a book like this where, they kind of have rules to their abilities, then it really just adds a whole nother level to the book. But
I wanted to
yeah.
read two quotes from the book that kind of like, I think, show this journey of like learning about power. So Ged talks about, he says, the more he learned, the less he would have to fear, until finally, in his full power as wizard, he needed fear nothing in the world, nothing at all. So that's what he thinks. He thinks power equals being fearless. It means being able to change any circumstance that you need to. And once he literally tears a fabric, like a hole in the fabric of the world, a shadow crawls out, attacks him. He has to be saved. It kills the archmage
Memory.
in the process. And so then he comes back, and the new archmage is giving him some advice after Ged realizes what he's done now. He's kind of been humbled, I think, by that whole thing, realizing that what he's doing, even if he doesn't intend for it to have evil done, even if he doesn't intend to cast a shadow, to use kind of the themes that this talks about, shadow will happen. The new archmage says, you thought as a boy that a mage is one who can do anything. So I thought once, so did we all. And the truth is that as a man's real power grows and his knowledge widens, ever the way he can follow grows narrower, until at last he chooses nothing, but does only and wholly what he must do. And I just loved that, because here's Ged having this explained to him, and then immediately you think back on Ogion and the fact that that's exactly what he embodied.
Yeah.
Never doing anything unless he must do it. Ged even made that comment, why are you not having the rain stop raining on us when we walk? Well, that's not something he needs to do. And Ogion had the wisdom to know that. So yeah, I just really, that whole like
Yeah.
evolution and how Ursula continues to come back. And really, I love the fact, because I think that some authors, brilliant authors, can be very, they kind of keep their themes a little bit more in the background. So you search them out more a little bit as a
Mm-hmm.
reader. But Ursula really kind of takes her readers by the hand and is like, this is what I want you to get from this book.
Yeah, she really does. Yeah, it's very in your face, but not in like an abrasive way. But yeah, there's no hiding how she feels about certain issues. It's clear that like the sort of macho character who can take care of anything just through strength and power, that's like definitely not her like ideal. Her ideal hero is like an Ogion, this wise, and
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's cool because
Yep.
this was originally a YA novel. It still is, and for any young kid reading that, it's kind of cool to know that you don't have to be the most powerful or whatever, whether you're a wizard or just a kid. It's really just like through knowledge and just kind of being. I just like the principles that it's kind of trying to teach almost. And I love that even the shadow itself, I like that is the villain that she's using, because as we get into this book, the themes with that will grow obviously more. What do you think of the introduction of the shadow?
I mean, obviously, this idea of a shadow is hinted at several times in the beginning, even so far as to say, well, Ogion, I think, first kind of presents this idea of the shadow. We kind of are almost introduced to it when Ged first tries that incantation, and Ogion comes in and is able to kind of shut everything down before it gets too
Mm-hmm.
crazy. And then he says, to light a candle is to cast a shadow. And then the next day, or a couple days later, I don't know exactly what the timeline is, whenever Ged decides he is going to go to Roke,
Mm.
then he's on the boat called Shadow. um, and
Oh yeah.
and just tons of leading up to the fact that this idea of shadow and darkness is going to be his main fight. And again, I don't want to. I want to keep the focus on a Wizard of Earthsea, but again, just because of the fact that I think that there's so many connections to other heroes that we know, very much gave me vibes of Luke Skywalker, of this
Mm-hmm.
idea that there is both light and dark within him. Um, And I think that Ursula's very much giving us the same thing with Ged. There's a light path and a dark path that he can take, and he has to face that shadow. I think what the book is very much showing is he has to face his own inner shadow, his own inner darkness, in order to actually have the light be what is the main part of him. And so then eventually we're introduced to the main shadow, which is when Ged tries to do the raising that woman from the dead and rips a hole in the universe, and then a shadow crawls out and mauls his face. And now he's going to be hunted by that shadow whenever he leaves the school. And it just really set up this whole idea of what I love about it is I feel like it's very much setting up this idea of here's this outward protagonist or an outward antagonist, but at the same time, this outward antagonist is still symbolic of the inward struggle that Ged has to have. And I think that every hero has to have in order to realize their full potential of light and dark.
That was really well said. And that will be, for our readers out there listening, keep that in mind as you read the book. That's going to be a very important theme as we kind of move forward. But, to that, it's just, I think once again, not to unwrap it too much, but it's very smart of Le Guin to incorporate that idea into it. I mean, it's just, she takes such a casual concept of adolescence and growing up and figuring out who you are, and yet turned it into an entire world. And I think that's kind of what this whole book is trying to do. And so the fact that, the shadow element, for lack of better words, it's just really well done and just really cool and fits exactly into what she's trying to do and what she did.
And it is, it is hard to read this and not see how influential I really do believe she has been in the formation of other fantasy series. Because, I grew up loving Harry Potter. One of my favorite books was really something I started reading it in 5th grade. And so it was really one of the series that made me love reading as much as I do. And there's so many things about Ursula K. Le Guin that I just have to believe that J.K. Rowling probably read her growing up and probably had some of these formative ideas. I mean, even so small as, and I know you kind of brought this up earlier, so I wanted to talk about this anyway, but the idea of the importance of names in this book, obviously naming something, having the name of something is what gives you power over that thing. And what is one of the biggest things that we see throughout the Harry Potter series, this idea that because Harry does not fear Voldemort's name like other people do, that helps give him a little bit of additional power over Voldemort. And there's a part of me that was like, oh, is that a little bit of Le Guin coming out in J.K. Rowling's writing there? And so I just, and it is cool to think about the immense power, so much so that Ged talks about how people do not tell other people their true names unless it is somebody who they're entrusting with their deepest secrets, who they would trust their life with. Yes.
Ooh, whoops, I kicked my desk. But yeah, that's what was really kind of showed me the maybe not intimacy, but when toward the end of Ged's time at school, when him and his friend Vetch exchange each other's real names, like that's kind of my first introduction of like, this is, in this world, sharing that is a very intimate process, because, for a wizard to give your real name, like you said, that's full power that they control over each other. And so, yet again, just another brand new idea.
They have control over your life source. I think what the book says. Like, that's just insane.
It is, yeah. And it's, once again, like, I love that it's the name. I think there is a lot of power in people's name and, history. So, it's just picking this book apart and finding all of these aspects that I had never even considered before. Even when he, some of my favorite parts of when he's in school is when he's going on to that distant island to work with the headmaster of naming things, and he's literally just reading through textbook after textbook of just words, and he's just familiarizing himself with the world that he's living in. And it goes back to your point of just purely that knowledge is power in this world, and it's like it controls everything. And it's pretty easy to tell because as you keep progressing into the book, and even in this book, anytime there are like foolish characters, they're always evil. Like when he's on the boat sailing into the school, he deals with some characters on the boat, and it's just education clearly is key in this world that they live in.
Well, and I think too, like with I love that. I feel like Ursula K. Le Guin, she uses names to symbolize the importance of and the power of knowing the true self of something. Because that's like, you don't learn the name of an animal or a tree or a rock or a person until you know what that thing is, the true essence of that being, of that thing. I think Ojan says that in chapter 2 about how you have to truly know, what this is before you can know its true name and have power over that thing. Because of the fact that you can't respect something unless you know the true essence of who it is and who they are. And I don't know, I feel like that says so much about what Ursula is trying to say in that, connecting to knowledge is power, but then also how so many times I think humanity, you want to have power over things you don't understand. You want to have power over people you don't understand, or you feel like you are entitled to have power over people you don't understand. And basically she's saying you should have power over nothing until you truly understand
who they are. And
yes, so that you have
like
the
you've
wisdom.
walked a mile in their shoes, almost like that saying. She made that into like a full-on plot.
Yes, and it's only through that wisdom that you can wield that power in a responsible way that does not completely throw off the equilibrium of the entire world.
Right, which I like that you brought up responsible too, because I think it's clear she kind of makes it sound like, you can't just acquire these powers overnight in this world, that they kind of almost have this system in that it works out well that the ones who are the most educated are the ones who are the wizards with the most power. And it's not the other way around where like someone with more ill intent could become powerful. And just the kind of hierarchy of the wizards was interesting as well. So with that, as we're kind of dwindling away through the kind of, we've gone over a lot of talking points. Let's now do something kind of fun toward the end. How about we each pick a part of the first 4 chapters that was our favorite. It could be a scene, a character, an idea. What was your favorite part of chapters 1 through 4, Megan? I'll go with mine first while you're thinking. How's that?
Yeah, you do yours.
Okay, so my favorite part of the first 4 chapters was it was when he was at school, and I think it's that exact part where he's talking to. I know I brought this up earlier in this conversation, but when he's talking to the master summoner and he's learning how to summon water or summon the elements, and he's summoning rainfall, he then learns that with rainfall there at the school, that means somewhere else in Earthsea there is a drought. And just that idea of balance, because like I just blew my mind when I read that. I was like, oh, you never think about in superhero movies or any of that when they do their power that there's some sort of exchange with the universe. And it just tells me like I always gravitate toward writers who are like naturalists, or the environment's a big part of how they write. Clearly Ursula's like that, and I love that she kind of throws in those hints of, respect the earth respects back. I like that philosophy of kind of being one with nature. And I can tell through these first 4 chapters that any successful wizard in the world of Earthsea has a pretty strong understanding of his or her natural surroundings.
I Um, I think my favorite part, this is, I think my favorite part, and it's kind of an unusual part to be my favorite, but it's right at the very end of chapter 4 when he's trying to leave the school and
Mm-hmm.
he goes up to the doorkeeper.
The doorkeeper. Yeah, that's a cool
And
scene.
the doorkeeper's like, he knows Ged's name because Ged had to give it to him in order to enter at the very beginning. And he says, okay, Ged, in order for you to leave, you must tell me my name. And Ged asks if he can sit and think for a while, which I was like, I felt like that in and of itself was very symbolic of how much Ged has grown, that he was
Mm-hmm.
willing to just like take a beat and be like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, I'll think about that and see
Chill
what I
out
need
for
to
a
do.
sec and not just bust out a spell.
Yes. And he sits and he strategizes and he thinks through everything that he can do to figure out this man's name. And he comes back and he realizes there's nothing he can do other than ask if he will give him his name. And the doorkeeper does, and he leaves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's as simple as it is. And I think it says so much, one about where Ged is, like I said, but then it also says so much about this world that Ursula has created where these powerful, powerful people, these powerful wizards are at the school where they're being taught how to enhance their powers, and yet in order to leave it back into the world, they have this like last final reminder that sometimes what you have to do to get to the next thing is not rely on yourself or your own power, but rely on the generosity of others.
Mm-hmm. Just ask. Yeah.
Someone being willing to share their name with you, someone being willing to give you that piece of information, being willing to ask for help, or being willing to admit there's nothing I can do to get this information. Can you give it to me?
Right. Like he didn't
And I think
forcefully take it or
no,
anything.
and I
Just
think that's such like a humbling way to leave a place like Roke, to
mm,
have that be your last transaction before entering into the world as this staffed sorcerer.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
So,
I'm glad we got to bring that up because that part with the doorkeeper is really cool and just like everything you just touched on. Yeah, exactly.
it just struck me as a really interesting. I think I just didn't expect it because it was
Mm,
so anticlimactic
right.
and just it was like it just happened. I was like, oh, so interesting. That was such an
Yeah.
interesting part.
That was kind of my whole thought on the school, to be honest. Not saying anticlimactic, but
Mm-hmm.
I was expecting at least 2 or 3 chapters of, your classic high school stories or, like meeting friends and this and that. But nope, she keeps it pretty simple, but yet plenty detailed. One chapter. And yeah, just not what I was expecting, but in a good way.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's about all the time we have this time. Thanks for everyone who tuned in today. We'll be doing another one in about a month for chapters, probably just do 5 through 8. And then
And there's one
in
thing I wanted
April.
to mention real fast before we wrap up too much is if anyone's listening to this and they have a commentary that they want to bring up, they have something they want to say, something they'd like us to discuss, please let us know. We would love to like maybe include that in our next podcast or even
Definitely.
discuss our own feelings.
Yeah.
Probably the best way to do it is just shoot Kyler an email. His email address is engage@matthewsopera.com. And you can find all of that on our website, or even if you just send us a Facebook message, do a Facebook comment, do a YouTube comment if you're listening to this on YouTube. Any of those ways, we would just love to hear from you and any of your thoughts about this book. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's a great point, and please do that, folks. If you have, like Megan said, like there's a lot in this book to break down, and we can't break it all down. And there's a lot of really interesting, cool points in this book. So if anyone out there wants us to touch on something specific, please reach out to us, and we would love to. But so yeah, each month it'll look just like this. In March we'll do the next set of chapters, and then in April we'll wrap the book up, and then hopefully, ideally, by around April, the community has somewhat read the book, and then we'll have our keynote presentation with Marcia Mittman, where we're going to really break into the book overall, and there will be spoilers that night. So, but yeah, thanks for tuning in. I hope you guys are enjoying the book, and until next time.